Do you ever have one of those moments when you accidentally say something so smart that it's like you're standing beside yourself and you're going, I hope somebody's taking notes because that was really good? Well, it happened to me yesterday in my introduction to yesterday's devotion when I made the comment that the academic approach to the Bible, the original languages, the culture, the history, everything involved like that, is for academic reasons. It's to learn what the Bible has to say. And that is so true. That's really important. I get that. But then I went on to say something like, but a devotional approach to Bible study isn't so much studying about what the Bible has to say, learning about the Bible. Devotional approach to Bible study is learning about you. The purpose of a devotional Bible study is to ask two questions. God, what do you have for that I need to know about me? And what do you have here that I need to know about you? Devotional Bible study is all about your heart and applying the Bible to your heart, not just the academic approach, which is also really important. I understand that. But anyway, that was just a moment yesterday where I actually said something smart accidentally, and I took note of it. So, having said that, let's get started with today's devotional on chapter 15 of 2 Samuel. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Paige. I am Paige, your caffeine-imbued host, and yes, here it is. My coffee. And in the beginning, coffee, and lo, it was very good. I can hear the choir singing behind me now. Today's episode is going to be on chapter 15. Just to bring you up to speed, Absalom has been with his grandfather and his grandfather's kingdom with Geshur for 3 years after killing his brother Amnon. He runs to his grandfather's kingdom, whom David had a political alliance with because Absalom's mother was the king of Geshur's daughter. And apparently David went to war with Geshur and resolved everything by marrying his daughter. There's a political alliance there. Absalom's a son. He kills Amnon, who was ahead of him in the birth order to become the heir apparent to the throne. With Amnon gone, Absalom now is the eldest, which puts him in line for the throne. So I'm sure there were elements of that involved with why he killed Amnon. Yes, Amnon did rape Absalom's sister, Tamar. But I'm not sure that he didn't use that as an excuse to get rid of the heir apparent, which makes him now the leading heir apparent to the throne. He's gone for 3 years. David is convinced by Joab to bring Absalom back, and he does. But things are not as they were before. David treats Absalom pretty coldly. There's little to no interaction between the two of them. And now we pick up the story. Absalom's been in Jerusalem for a time. And this is where we go. Chapter 15. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses with 50 men to run ahead of him. By the way, that sounds an awful lot like something a king would do. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." This actually says a lot here in this little passage. First of all, there was no judge sitting at the gate. City gates is where judicial cases were settled. Now, either David would be there or he would have a representative there, but apparently there is nobody there to adjudicate for the people of Israel. And Absalom is taking advantage of that. I think this is a huge slip up on the part of David. We'll talk about that later. Also, when anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king, asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. All right, did Absalom just make this up? Was this something he just started to do out of the blue? He decided, you know what? I'm a king's son. Maybe I should go see what the... No, I honestly believe, in my conspiracy theorist heart, that this plan was hatched while he was with his grandfather in Geshur. The 3 years he was gone. He comes back and he starts doing this. David has put him on ice. David has not treated him warmly. And so he just puts on this best smarmy face and says all the right things to the people and says, oh, if only I were judge. Oh, I could take care of this. Your cause is right. I wish there was a judge here who could decide for you. There was no judge there to decide for them. David was making a severe mistake. Now, Absalom's providing himself with chariot and horses and men to run ahead of him. This should have been a warning sign to David that Absalom's ambition was the throne. His plan to ingratiate himself to the people of Israel is simple and it's subtle. He becomes one of the people. You know, if I were king, this is how I would act towards my people of Israel. That's really what he's saying here. And what he's saying here, as opposed to what my father's doing. My father is out of touch. I, however, am in touch. Your cause is just. If I were judge, I would decide in your favor. You can see where he's going with this stuff. So, he's doing this for a couple years, right? At the end of 4 years, all right, just put this timeline in place. Absalom fled to Geshur, his grandfather's kingdom, and he stayed there 3 years. He comes home. I can't help but think that the upcoming plot that we see him starting was hatched there. 7 years after he left for Geshur, 4 years after his return to Jerusalem, he launches his plot to overthrow David. He's in full gear now. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, I made this vow, if the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent secret messages throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. Oh my goodness. All right, it's getting into the thick weeds now, right? A couple things to notice here. Absalom has gained the heart of the people. He's getting ready to announce himself as king. He's been acting like a king. Chariots, horses. And he sets his plan. So when you hear the trumpets, have all the people start shouting, Absalom is king. So he's getting ready to launch his plan. But something else is interesting here. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, it said he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite. Who's Ahithophel? Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba. He was angry at what David did to his granddaughter. Now, you can go back a couple episodes and find out the story of David and Bathsheba and see what I thought about that whole affair. But it wasn't a matter of her enticing and seducing David the king while her husband was away. David took advantage of her. And then David killed her husband. And this angered her grandfather, Ahithophel. And I'm a grandfather. If someone hurt my granddaughter, I would be incensed. I would be angry beyond angry. If you hurt my daughter, you hurt my granddaughter, I'm angry. Ahithophel sides with Absalom, even though his daughter, Bathsheba, is still married, or his granddaughter rather, Bathsheba is still married to David. Ahithophel sides with Absalom. He wants nothing more than the downfall of David. We can see that. Absalom sends for Ahithophel. And so the conspiracy gained strength because Ahithophel was in David's inner circle. David had an enemy in his court that apparently he was unaware of. He probably thought things were square with him and Bathsheba's grandfather, but it wasn't. He was waiting his time, biding his time. And now Ahithophel goes to Absalom, which also gives Absalom's claim for the kingship credence in the eyes of the people because a court official is siding with Absalom against the current king David. A messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. The king's officials answered him, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord, the king, chooses. So the king set out, with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines behind to take care of the palace. So the king set out, with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. All his men marched past him, along with all the Kerethites and Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath, marched before the king. Now these were mercenaries, and these were his crack troops. It was a pretty sizable force. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, why should you come along with us? Go back, stay with King Absalom. All right, so David's already realized that he is no longer king. It's King Absalom now. He says, you're a foreigner, an exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday. And today, shall I make you wander around with us when I don't know where I'm going? Go back, take your people with you. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness. But Ittai replied to the king, as surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there will your servant be. So David said to Ittai, go ahead, march on. So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. So apparently, not everybody in Israel was with Absalom. I'm just kind of wondering if it was like city, rural versus urban. Like the urban population were fooled by Absalom, but the rural people weren't because he didn't spend any time there. He spent all his time at the city gate. So Israel would be divided on this Absalom-David issue. And the country people are seeing David leave, and they're upset. They're upset. Man. Whatever problems certain citizens of Jerusalem and other towns may have had with David, apparently people living in the countryside did not see things the same way. He is their king, and they weep aloud in fear of an uncertain future. The country is divided now. There's people for David, people against David. A civil war is getting ready to break out. Zadok was there too. And all the Levites who were with him were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. They left with David. They brought the Ark of the Covenant with them. They set down the Ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, I'm ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." Now, for all of David's faults, and there are lots, his instinct is to turn to God. His instinct is to return to the God who has delivered him time and time and time again, and whom he's going to turn to this time for deliverance. But he seems to recognize the fact that he has sinned pretty grievously, and it's a very real possibility that God will not deliver him this time. But he's still surrendering to the sovereignty of God in this situation. If God delivers me, great. But if he says, I'm not pleased, then I'm ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. This is the act of a man who understands the sovereign nature of God. David is such an imperfect, flawed individual, but this part of him stays intact. When he wakes up, he turns to God, and he's had a huge wake-up call. The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing." He said, "I'm not mad at you. Go back. Take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan. You and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So in other words, I want you to go back, pay attention to what's going on, and send word to me about what happens when Absalom comes back. So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. Now David, in his grief and in his ongoing repentance, as we're seeing here, he's still keeping his wits about him. He's going to have the priests be his informants. David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. He wasn't wearing, he was in grief. He was in grieving. He was crushed by his sin. And he knows what his sin is. You know that. You can see it here. He was weeping as he walked up the Mount of Olives. Head was covered. He was barefoot. It was like he was going to a funeral. And in fact, he was. It was the death of his rule as king of Israel. He did not know at this moment that he would be coming back as king. It's very possible that at this moment, his life as king of Israel was finished. Now, David had been told, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, "Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness." Now, Ahithophel is a valuable ally to Absalom because he knows the inner working of David's court. And as a counselor to David, he understands David. And so he can provide incredible intel to Absalom about what David may or may not do. He can provide incredible intel to Absalom about how his father thinks. Now, you have to realize Absalom has not spent a lot of time with his father. Ahithophel has. And Ahithophel has been waiting for his moment. And now he will be able to exact a measure of revenge against David for what David did to his granddaughter. David's intelligence network is already starting to return information. That's how he got the information about Ahithophel, or Ahithophel is among the conspirators of Absalom. So David knows now that the conspiracy reaches into his inner circle. That Ahithophel was one of his counselors. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, 'Your Majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant.' then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Now, this is interesting. David is still keeping his wits about him. Apparently, Hushai the Archite was also part of the inner circle of David. But he wants Hushai the Archite to be like a double agent. Tell Absalom, I'll be your counselor. I was with David. I was part of his inner circle. I'll advise you. And he says, I want you to go there and frustrate Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? You won't be alone, he said. Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their two sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So Hushai, David's confidant, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. All right, so now the scene is set. The struggle is in full bloom. David has left the city with his entourage. He's on the run from Absalom. And Absalom is entering the city, and he's going to be announced as king. And for a time, he will be the king of Israel. But David has spies in the camp. And he left behind one of his senior counselors to counter whatever it is Ahithophel is going to advise Absalom to do. Now, David has to realize the depth of Ahithophel's anger as Bathsheba's grandfather. And he needs somebody to counter the anger that is going to be present in Ahithophel. And that's going to be Hushai the Archite. So David has spies in the camp. He's not without resources. He's surrounded by a small army that is very, very talented, very, very capable. And he's on the run into the wilderness. Now, if you want a little bit of insight into what's going on in David's head, he wrote a psalm, Psalms 3. And we're going to read that here in a second. And that's going to tell you where David's heart is at. And again, for all of his faults, David's instinct is to turn to God. Even though his other instincts lead him away, his instincts always bring him back. And we're going to see that in a second. But I want to touch on a thing here. The problems that laid the foundation for what's happening at this moment with Absalom has everything to do with David. You know, my father once told me that the greatest defense a man has is his reputation. In other words, he was saying, live your life in such a way that if someone ever accuses you, speaks ill of you, they won't be believed because of your reputation. We're going to read Psalms 3 in a minute, and you're going to see a grieving heart of a man who's turned to God, looking for deliverance, but surrendering to the sovereign nature of God, to let God do what God's going to do. You can see a man whose heart is turned to God, but it's also apparent that David didn't practice what my dad told me. He didn't live his life in such a way that someone accused him, nobody would believe him. Absalom accused him of lots of things. Ahithophel, as I'm sure, did. And the people believed them. Why did they believe what Absalom had to say? Because David's actions did not deny the accusation. Absalom's thing was, the king doesn't care about you. If he did, he'd be here at the city gate adjudicating. David doesn't care about you because he doesn't have judges out here judging the people. If I were king, I would be here for you. David had no response to that because it's obvious that he was guilty. He did not live his life in such a way that when accused, people would refuse to believe the accuser. The people found it very easy to believe the worst about David. The slick words and glib manner of Absalom won them over. And that could only have been possible because David had got caught up, like I'm inventing words, that David had got caught up in the wealth, position, and all the trappings of being a king. His actions toward the people of God are not in step with his actions and attitudes concerning God. There's a message there. Let me read that last sentence again. His actions toward the people of God, Israel, are not in step with his actions and attitudes concerning God. I'm sure we've all known people like that. Now, this speaks to my heart, again, because in my earlier life as an engineer, I got caught up in the trappings and all that went along with a six-figure salary. I got caught up in the ease of life that all that money brought. And as a result, I wasn't spending time with God, God's people. I became very relaxed and confident in my ability to keep bringing in the six-figure paycheck. Then all of a sudden, the rug's yanked out from under me. Six-figure paycheck is gone. And I am rumbling down the road towards bankruptcy, towards losing everything. Everything. I only managed to hang on to the house long enough to sell it to pay off the majority of the bankruptcy debt. But God had to yank the rug out from under me to get my attention, to force me back to my dependence on him. We're going to read Psalms 3 here in a second. That is what God is doing to David here. God is yanking the carpet out from under David because David is forgetting who God is, and God is reminding him. And David comes back, to his credit, repentant. But that doesn't mean he's going to escape penalties for his behavior. So let's look at Psalms 3 and see what God has to say here. Psalm 3, a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? All right, stop and think a second. The entire nation appears, in David's eyes, the entire nation appears to be rising up against him. The nation that cheered his name. Saul has slain his thousands. David has slain his tens of thousands. The nation that cheered, the armies that cheered because he defeated Goliath. How many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Selah. Selah means think about this. Now think about that. Many are saying God won't deliver him. Why are they saying that? Because he has violated so much of God's commands. His character, his actions are in such conflict with the man that God has called him to be. It's like he's not even part of God's world anymore. That's the appearance he gives. God will not deliver him, they said. But you, Lord, this is David saying this, are a shield about me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain, Selah. God is always ready to call upon. He is always ready to be called upon. He is always ready to answer. David is calling out. I lay down and I sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. See, that's the sovereignty of God. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. All the armies of Israel are going to be coming against me. I won't fear. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Selah. Now, this is kind of interesting and neat to me. The last sentence of the psalm isn't about David. It's about the people of Israel. May your blessing be on your people. At the end of the day, David's heart is towards the people of Israel. That God bless Israel. And I don't see in this psalm a cry for his return to the throne. It says, I have many foes. They're all saying, you won't deliver me. but you're my shield, you're my glory. I call to you, you answer me. I lay down and sleep, I wake again because of your mercy and your grace. Arise, Lord, deliver me. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people, Israel. An incredible psalm. Now, David is in the thick of it. He's on the run. Absalom is sitting on his throne in Jerusalem, and David is no longer king of Israel. Whew. What's going to happen next? Well, you'll have to wait for tomorrow. That'll be chapter 16. Until then, there's some good lessons to be learned here. Live your life in such a manner that if anyone accuses you of wrongdoing, nobody will believe them. The accuser of our soul, the enemy of our soul, will always attempt to destroy us through reputation. Live your life in such a manner so that if anyone accuses you of wrongdoing, your reputation will be your defense. God's blessings, may that be the truth for all of us believers, that we live our life in such a way that nobody believes any accusation laid against us.